Welcome to Wisdom for Life, where we sift through philosophy to find practical advice that you can use in your everyday life. Hi, I'm Dan Hayes. I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Greg Sadler, and today we're talking about
why taking downtime is important for us as human beings, and particularly in the time and era that we're in. And I don't just mean the grand historical sweep of late capitalism and all that. We're also recording this at a time in between holidays. Thanksgiving has passed with all of the stuff that entails. We've got the other holidays coming up, at the end of the year. And it could be, I think, kind of useful for us to remind ourselves of the need to take some downtime for ourselves. And there's a lot of ways of looking at downtime, some of which, I'm going to say this a little bit punnily, are more productive than others. Because, if it's real downtime, we shouldn't be focusing on being productive. But there's some that are better suited to us than others. And so what we're going to try to do here is a pretty freewheeling conversation that's looking into the downtime that we do take and how we can have better downtime or more thoughtful or deliberate downtime. And we're also going to talk about what stands in the way of it. And I pitched this idea to Dan in part because I heard something on NPR a while back that I thought was kind of provocative. And it was actually over the Thanksgiving break. I was driving along and I was listening to one of those shows, and they had this Swedish philosopher, Lars Svensson. Boy, you can't get a more Swedish name than that. And he works on the topic of burnout. And one of the things that he said that I thought was really interesting, he said, "My dangerous idea is that work isn't what's wearing us out these days, but our leisure time. In fact, we've never worked less than we do today. Most people are actually happy with their work, even though they believe that work in general is getting harder. But their own work isn't getting harder, and we sleep less than we used to. But whatever we're spending that time on, it's not work. So really, what is wearing us out? What is making us burnt out? It's really our leisure time." And when I heard that, I think a lot of Americans had the response of, wow, it must be nice to be in Sweden where we're working less and the work isn't what we're finding onerous or burning us out or anything. Because I don't think that's the case for a lot of Americans. So we're going to talk about that in a bit. But I did think that his remark that our leisure time is not really that relaxing. It's not conducive to downtime or to refreshing ourselves, maybe. There's something to that, I think. And so I thought that would be a good jumping off point to explore. But we have a counterpoint as well. Dan's going to lead you into this.
Yeah, so, he has an interesting idea. There's something from a recent post on Reddit from the anti-work subreddit making the rounds. Quote, "I met this guy in uni, and since graduating he's been living the life. He got up at 5 a.m. to work out and do all life's admin, then worked 8:30 to 19:30, or 7:30 in the afternoon, every day in finance for about $150K a year, and then would spend his evenings working on his side hustle business. On weekends, he'd do voluntary management work for a charity. He had financial independence, and he was going to retire early. The world was his oyster, and he would travel around the world to every country with a laptop. I never left Europe and got very envious of this." But he said, "But the sad reality is, he's been a zombie for over a decade now. He never got more than 5 hours sleep. He never ate healthy food. He didn't have romantic relationships and never found time for friends. And he was always cutting costs to save for retirement. He'd have cheaper, longer flights with many changes and dump his bags at a hostel before getting to work on zero sleep. He never got to explore the places he was in. It was always just another office. I'd only see him once every 3 months or so, and even when he was living in his house 20-minute walk away from me, and whenever I saw him, he'd be too exhausted to do any activities. We'd just go to the pub where he switched off an hour, and his biggest regret was taking up smoking, which he did to network with managers on smoke breaks at a previous job, and then found quite impossible to quit. My last conversation with him was about work. I said that I get an extra 5 days annual leave because I've worked here 5 years now. He said it's not worth it. I'd be better off switching jobs, get a pay raise, and then take unpaid time off to return to my previous salary. I'm going to take those 5 days off to spend with my family and think about my good times I had with old friends. I found out about his death when the hospital called me. He kept my phone number in his wallet as an emergency contact. I didn't know this until I got the call. I didn't realize I was the closest person he had in the world. To me, he felt like a distant friend who I only got to hang out with a few times a year.
Yeah, that's quite a story, isn't it? I mean,
right.
It's not quite Ebenezer Scrooge level of miserness or whatever we call it. It's not, I guess it is kind of misery, but a miser, whatever it is that they're up to. But this guy's doing it instead, not so much with just money, but with his time and attachments and connections. And I think these are kind of two sides of the story. On the one hand, we've got this Swedish philosopher who's saying, it's not the work that's the problem. It's not knowing what to do with our leisure time. And then we've got this guy who, I think we know people like this, right? Who are constantly hustling. They seem to have all of their priorities in order, but something goes drastically wrong and they don't enjoy their life.
What do you mean that I shouldn't be out there on Christmas Day, picking up an Uber ride? What is this? There's money on the table. You're just leaving it there? What's wrong with you, Greg?
Uber's an interesting one because a few years back, when we were in between various money-making activities, we knew some friends who were driving for Uber, and we looked into possibly using one of our cars for Ubering. And we realized when we started poking around that there wouldn't be a real gain in doing it, that we would be adding a lot of wear and tear to our cars and, taking the time that we have for other things and spending it on driving people around and maybe having random conversations with strangers, which could be nice, or could also be awful, depending on what kind of people they are.
Well, you don't want to be like the Socrates of
Uber
driver picks you up and starts poking at you. I was like,
I don't. No,
what is it to have a good night?
There's probably somebody out there that would be perfectly suited to that, right? And the good thing in philosophy is we've got a division of labor. We don't all have to be Socrates. We can do other things instead. But I mean, what do you make of these two different tales?
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to say is, or you could be like the Diogenes of Uber, and you pull up and you flash your brights at them, and it says, "I'm looking for a good man. Also needs a ride." Okay, so the first one here is interesting because this is definitely a question of what makes good downtime or leisure. We are in such a connected world that in one way that we fail at this is to be constantly berated by our dings and our whistles of our little Skinner boxes that we all carry in our pocket. And Skinner box is a device used in psychology, or is it?
It was psychology, and it was the behaviorist school that Skinner was particularly associated with.
B.F. Skinner, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Basically, it was a box that would give you rewards for hitting the button, and we basically turned our phones into that with all their apps that ding and beep at you. Also, you see these a lot in casinos. They're designed to get you to keep on pulling that lever. All those flashing lights, you could just be a winner. It's one more pull away. To finish my thought here, we have this, this constantly connected way of interacting with the world that has resulted in us not having really good leisure, as well as, especially within, when we're so far away from our families. If you're living alone or something, that there's definitely something about doing this thing on your own and relaxing it on your own instead of like with people in a really very supportive place. And then the other side here, we were talking about this guy who's working out, that his entire life is just hustling, and I guess good for him, but you're optimizing for only one thing in your life, and you're sacrificing the rest of your life for it. I don't feel like that's a really good way to lead your life, and as it says, at the end of here, he dies at a rather young age, it seems.
Yeah.
You never know when your life is going to come to an end, and because of this, there's not always this guarantee that all these plans that you put into motion are actually going to come to fruition.
Yeah, and I mean, if you knew ahead of time that you were going to die at 35 as opposed to 85, I think there's a lot of sacrifices that we make, a lot of investments in time, energy, thought, money, even integrity, where we would be like, nope, not really worth it, But we don't know when we're going to pass away, unless we've been given like a death sentence by the doctor or something, or we've committed some crime, and like Socrates know that we're going to die in a matter of time drinking some hemlock. I mean, for most of us, that's just not the case, and we're always sort of making bets, aren't we, about the value of the things that we pass up or we pursue. So I think that in our society, again, let's go back to the Swedish guy. I don't think, there are some people who really do struggle with having so much leisure time. They have to figure out what to do with it. They're in a fortunate situation as far as work, but I don't think that's the case for most of us in the present. Americans seem to be particularly driven to work more and more, and some of that is, because jobs don't pay quite as well as they ought to, or we need to work to accumulate the benefits that would otherwise come from those. If we look at, we compare ourselves to other developed countries, there's a lot of things that are placed on us, and employers are quite often trying to squeeze as much as they can out of their employees, to, as we say, do more with less. And, that works for a while, but eventually people get used up and burned out. There are some people who don't have enough work, and then they have to figure out what to do with their time so that it's, they're not just simply wasting their time. They're not bored all the time or engaging in shallow activities that don't really contribute to their happiness. But I think most of us, it's a matter of we've got so much work, that we have to decide what to do well with our leisure time. And it's interesting that you brought up like the casinos, because we go to the local casino, the Potawatomi, to see bands, because we go to the Northern Lights Theater, and they have really, some really good bands that come in. And it's, I like it in part because it's super easy to get in. You park, you walk across, you got to go down on the casino floor where you see people playing games. And then you're in the small theater, and you see the band, and it's like 5 minutes to get out of there and go back home. But a lot of things that we think are going to be very relaxing, going to other concerts, or if you want to go to a Packers game, it's a big production. There's so much involved in there. You got to find parking, and then take the Packers game thing. If you go up to Lambeau Field and you find parking, you're going to walk for a long ways to get there, and then there's long lines to get in, and you watch the game. If God forbid, you should, buy something to eat or drink, it's going to be quite a bit of money. And then you got the long walk back out, perhaps having, watched the team lose and seeing all the people unhappy about it. And then you got to get to your car, and then you got to figure out how to negotiate getting out of the parking lot. I mean, it's a huge ordeal in some respects, and much of it is not all that relaxing. And I think we could say that about so many other things as well. I mean, Thanksgiving holidays, if you're the one cooking, that's not all that relaxing. Or if you're the one cleaning it up, or, you're stuck sitting next to the proverbial crazy uncle, that might not be that cool either, right? So a lot of
have you ever been the proverbial crazy uncle?
Well, not in the sense of spouting goofy conspiracy theories or anything like that. I was more Uncle Fun Time, the one who'd be, suggesting we play some games or something like that, listening to the kids complain about their parents or their classmates or their schools or stuff like that. But I don't know. I mean, it doesn't. What's the distance between crazy conspiracy theory uncle and Uncle Fun Time? I don't think there's a huge gap, So.
Yeah. So this all kind of reminds me of, I guess for the Swedish Lars here, the Swedish philosopher, that I totally agree with him in this, the bottom part, that what we do as leisure can sometimes be very not leisureful.
Can be taxing, right?
Yeah, but I think I do agree with this upper portion, especially depending on where you're working, especially in the United States. The first thing is that we lionize work and basically avarice. That it's good to have money, to make money, to all these things are goods in and of themselves, and that's kind of the general cultural consensus, which I think is really antithetical to actually one, making good relationships, because if all your relationships are based on money, then what is the point of that relationship? It's not for the benefit of you and the relationship and the person in it.
Yeah.
It's just for the benefit of getting more stuff and or money. And then the other part of this is that a lot of work nowadays, especially after the work from home movement, as now we're constantly in contact with our employers. That there's a constant line of communication, and unless you put up really strong walls, you are going to be contacted on off working hours, where the working hours tend to just kind of blend, and you're never off. You're always kind of in this moment, and if you're constantly in that moment, then you constantly have this little low level amount of let's say stress that is constantly pulling you to these thought patterns of work oriented things. And in order for us to actually recover from our actual work on a day to day, we have to have a time where we're not thinking about that.
That's right. And I think that there's something else that could be added on top of this. Actually, two things. So one is, you're right, there's this always on phenomenon. It used to be that we were on call. I used to work jobs where I'd have a pager or something like that, but I'd only be on call for a certain amount of time. And it wasn't
what's a pager?
Oh yeah, we should probably explain that for the younger crowd. It was something you could call, right? Somebody would call you, and then a little thing would come up, and the really primitive ones would just say the phone number, and then you'd have to call that number. And this is before cell phones, so you'd have to find a phone. And then some would actually, you could put in text, and they would say you need to show up here or something like that. And they were popular among people who wanted to look important, but they were also I had one when I was on security jobs, and I was the shift commander or stuff like that. So they would need to have the pager so they could call me in or things like that. But now instead we have texts and emails, and there's this expectation on the part of many employers that employees should make themselves available for all sorts of things outside of regular work hours. And some employees are pushing back, which is I think to their credit. But there's a kind of pressure there. Well, if I don't respond, then maybe they'll find another employee who will be more amenable to this. So there's that aspect. But I think a lot of people also, because they've received these signals, let's call them, or messages from all sorts of people, school, parents, employers, peers, they place these pressures upon themselves that they need to constantly be on the make, as we say, right? And I don't think this is just with jobs and money. You could fall into this quite easily with exercise programs and diet and stuff like that. Oh, if I'm going to do the exercise program, I need to do it 110%, so I need to really get into this. And I think people could even do this with fandoms or hobbies where one of the words that you used, optimizing a little bit earlier, right? I think there's this strain of excessive optimizing that a lot of people fall into. And it could be about your relationships. It could be you buy a whole bunch of self-help books or, listen to podcasts about how to improve your relationship. And I'm going to have the best relationship possible, right? And a lot of these aiming at the best, it's just not very helpful. As a matter of fact, I did a video recently because I had somebody who had asked me. They were concerned about their philosophy reading and that they were not making the best use of their spare time and reading, becoming very well read is how they put it. And I was like, nobody's very well read. Even the people you think are well read aren't reading everything. It's just impossible these days. And you can take that pressure off of yourself that you're placing on yourself, making yourself miserable by doing so. So even philosophy can become a trap in this respect for our own expectations of ourselves. That, doing some downtime it seems scary to a lot of people, I think, to do downtime because they're like, well, I'm going to fall behind, or I'm not going to make the progress that I need to do. But we really need more downtime, good downtime than we get,
Another thing that downtime allows us to do is to stop and reevaluate things. If we're constantly on the go, and we've set down a path and we're executing that program of these are the things I have to do, X, Y, Z, A, B, C, in that order every day, must do these things over and over, and you never have the moment to just go, oh, is this still a thing I want to do?
Yeah.
And if you're not, every once in a while doing that, then you're going to find yourself years down the road realizing that you had, gone 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction. And now you've put yourself at a much worse place than where you wanted to eventually go.
Yeah, that's quite true. And, I'm guilty of this myself. I use a Google Calendar that I put all sorts of things into, and the day gets filled up with, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And sometimes it actually ruins the fun of some of the activities that I'm involved in. I'll be like, well, I'm writing from 1 to 3 p.m. and then I feel the pressure to get something good done in that time. And if I don't get something good, then I feel like I'm a loser, But, I'm the one who's placed all those silly expectations on myself. I mean, some of them are commitments I've made to other people, granted, right, that I probably shouldn't have always made. But a lot of it is self-inflicted. And before I had the Google Calendar, I used to have a whiteboard, and I would do a tasks for the day thing. And I found myself getting down because I wouldn't get a lot of them done, and then I would have to shift them over to the next day. And some of them would just be on there for 5-6 days straight, And when you're reminded of what you're not getting done, you feel like crap, right?
So, slightly tangential, but I got into bullet journaling at one point in time.
Now, what is that?
Bullet journaling, it's a to-do list with extra steps, and it's kind of nice.
Okay.
Basically, the main idea is that every day that you or actually preferably at least the day before. You put down all the things that you would like to do. You make little bullets here, and you can, cross them off if you don't, once you do them. But at the end of the day, you look at the things that are left over, and you make a decision before you make your list for the next day.
Okay.
Of the ones that did not get done, are they important? And if they're not important enough that I didn't get them done, are they really actually important in the first place? And can you just not do them?
Okay, so you're giving yourself permission to drop things off your list. That's a good practice. That's smart. Because otherwise, you just keep accumulating more and more stuff that you can't get done, right?
And also, learning how to say no is also really important.
Yeah.
In that regard, as an extension of saying no to yourself is also to other people around you.
I think a long time ago, we did a show about setting limits, right? And sticking to them. And that might be a topic for us to revisit again. Particularly, as you noted, we've come out of COVID, where, people have gone back into the workplace, and there's tendencies for all sorts of people to make demands on us that we probably need to push back on sometime. I do want to address a few questions. I solicited some input from people in social media and YouTube when I should have done it a little bit earlier because I didn't get as much as I would have liked. But, I put that we were going to talk about this topic on the Wisdom for Life show. And one person wrote, "This is a great topic. I'm in the final leg of the semester and facing burnout once again." This is more of an academic student one. "When you were in grad school, did you work 7 days a week or take a day off to recharge?" And the answer is, I didn't work 7 days a week. I didn't even necessarily work 6 days a week in grad school. When I was in grad school, I was spending, until I actually got into some relationships that took a lot more of my time, I was probably working out about 2 hours a day, physical exercise. And I was learning languages and stuff like that. And of course, reading a lot of philosophy and doing work. But I also partied quite a bit and had time for hanging out with friends, or just, I did some gardening. I adopted two kittens and played with them. I think actually pets are a great way to spend leisure time. And, when I look back on it, well, I noticed this right away when I became a professor. You have so much more time as a graduate student than you do as a working professor. And it's probably the case in a lot of jobs, right? But I never got bored at that time, and it seemed like there was always stuff to do. A lot of it was related to the profession I was preparing for, but a lot of it wasn't, digging up spots to put in bulbs so that there'd be flowers coming up in the spring. I mean, that was just kind of screwing off time for me, which had some useful results, or picking flowers or taking walks or things like that. I found a lot of time to do that sort of thing. And I know that it was pretty healthy for me to do that. And similarly, I remember between undergraduate and graduate school, I lived here in Milwaukee over on Farwell in a tiny little studio apartment, not far from Shank Hall. And I was working two jobs. I would work in a cafe that no longer exists, and I worked as a third shift security guard. Sometimes with, no days off because they were very stingy about hiring new people. And so sometimes we have to work very, very long shifts and stuff like that. And yet I did have a lot of time to kind of screw off and enjoy myself and get enough sleep and make decent meals for myself. Sometimes, you look at the past and then you look at where we are in the present and you say, well, how did they get so busy now? And I think there's a point to thinking about that. What you were mentioning, Dan, in terms of our Skinner boxes, our mobile technology, that's been pretty game changing. You know, in 1994 and 95, when I would walk the 1.5 miles from my apartment on Farwell to 100 East Wisconsin, where I was doing the security job, I might listen to my Walkman, you know, but I didn't have a phone that I could pull out of my pocket and look at Twitter or check emails or anything like that on, you know, that I was tethered to.
Right.
I mean, you've been to college and you also have done a lot of tech and startup work. What would be your answer to this question?
Let's see. The first thing is I'd always take basically a whole day off at minimum after finals.
Okay.
I just do like basically nothing. I just needed that like decompression time. But otherwise, like right after college, I was working a full-time job. And then I do my 9 to 5. I was working for as a sysadmin for a supercomputing cluster, and then I went home. I ate dinner, and I rode my bike 10 miles to my startup job, and I worked on that until about midnight. And then I rode home.
A lot of hours.
And then rinse, repeat. And then I was also volunteer house managing for a boarding house, just because I had some property management background and I could help out in that regard. And between those three things, I totally burnt out. I overextended myself, and it ended badly for a number of things, including like relationships that were associated with some of these endeavors I was trying to build. You can't go 100 miles all the time. Things are going to fall through the cracks, and you're not going to be doing any one thing at the intensity or the thoughtfulness that one ought to do if they're like wanting to be excellent at the thing that they're trying to do.
Yeah, and that's got psychological effects when you're doing subpar work. And I say this from my own experience of committing to too many things and being overextended. It doesn't feel good. It's one thing if you've got a job just sweeping floors. Okay, I mean, you can even do that well, right? Or in a lackadaisical sort of way. But if other people are depending on you to like deliver on things that are kind of complex and demand some thought and attention, and you just kind of half-ass it, after a while, even if they let you get away with it, that you're not doing your best. Here's another interesting question. I'll let you answer this one first, rather than me jumping in. What is decent downtime? Does it include our favorite activities? Do our favorite activities actually relieve stress or function more as distractions? How did individuals in the past have downtime? What did they do with it?
In reality, for me, it's totally disconnecting. That's one of the biggest things is I don't want to have to interact with people. So if you need to get rid of your phone for a couple days, great. If you need to go to the woods, even better. That's and sleep well, oversleep. That is what I consider to be really good downtime. And then have good close relationships that you can go and just be comfortable with. Kind of be present there.
Yeah.
Especially if you got family and you can just get those good hugs. I don't know, all those endorphins that we get from being with people that we really care about and enjoy the company of. That's what I would consider.
I like that idea of being present. It reminds me of a philosopher who I didn't put into the show notes or anything, but this guy, Gabriel Marcel, who's understood like as being an existentialist. He actually is the first person to use the term existentialism in French, and then Jean-Paul Sartre comes along and kind of bogarts the term, and he's like, yeah, you can have it, right? And he talks about availability, in French, disponibilité, as this really central value. So like we would translate it probably as presence. When you're with somebody, you're actually like listening to them. You're not, getting your phone out and multitasking or thinking about the work that you have to do the next day or something, you're actually there with your family or your friend or your romantic partner or whoever else it happens to be. And you can do this even with strangers that you start chatting with on the bus or at a coffee house or something like that. Obviously, it's not going to go quite as deep, right? But that does seem to be an important component of downtime. What do you think about this favorite activities question? Do our favorite activities relieve stress or function more as distractions? Does it depend on what the activity is or who we are? Or
I think
it's
highly dependent. Absolutely. I guess there's this whole idea about like introverts versus extroverts.
Okay.
And that seems to be of at least dubious claim in a really easy like dichotomy. If there is something to it, it's definitely along a spectrum. But certain people get energized by being in crowds with people,
That's
and some
true,
people.
yeah.
It is the opposite. And so one needs to know themselves enough to know what are the things that are actually beneficial for them and seek those things out. What may be beneficial for, just relaxing for me might be very different from you, Greg. So, for example, I'm not a really big into metal, and so I think that you would much more enjoy a metal concert than I would.
Yeah. Interestingly, I was just thinking about that. So I was able to take my oldest kid to their first like real metal show at the Pabst Theater. It was Wasp and Armored Saint. We've gone to like stuff at Summerfest, but this is like being in the theater with a whole bunch of other people that are like just there to see this show. And it was a great show. But I remember like having this uptight attitude about shows in the past when I was much younger and didn't really have it together. Like I would go with my friends and we'd see Iron Maiden or AC/DC or whoever, and I needed it to be like the best experience ever, and I would put this kind of stress or weight on my shoulders. Like I have to be really enjoying myself or else, it's not a great experience. And yeah, not every show is going to be great. Things are going to go wrong. One of the things that actually did go wrong that Kat noticed was the singer and the guitarist for Armored Saint would come out on the wings, and the spotlight would be like not on them. So they're in the darkness, they're playing or singing, and the spotlight is on nobody. And, you could let that sort of thing like ruin your night, or you could be like, something must have gone wrong there. Somebody didn't program something right, or somebody's not paying attention. With the activities though, I was thinking, so some activities are probably not going to be, even if they're your favorite activity, they're not going to be like good downtime, like going to the casino and pumping money into slots. Some people say they find that relaxing, but I don't know about that. Or like endlessly binge watching shows on Hulu or Netflix or, whatever other streaming thing. It's entertaining, but it's not as refreshing and relaxing as it could be. Or maybe some of it would be like, you're not really into nature, but somebody drags you along on a 5-mile hike at we've got so many parks around here that one could go to. If that's not your thing, then it's not going to be really good downtime. I enjoy just like reading. I will admit that I don't often just read philosophical books for fun, sometimes I go back to classics that I know I'm going to enjoy. Most of the time, if I'm going to read something for fun, it's sci-fi or fantasy or horror or something like that,
So yeah, I'm right with you. I do a regular palate cleanser. I'll read something that's fiction, and then I'll try to find something nonfiction and kind of go back and forth.
Yeah, I have a former client who became a friend who's a really good reader. He just like blazes through books, and he talks about it in terms of the broccoli and the dessert. He makes himself read half an hour something that he feels that he ought to read for his benefit, and then he gets to read what he wants to read,
Nice.
So, Now I like broccoli, so
Same here.
Yeah.
But so what else we got? We got some diatribes into some ancient philosophy here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that philosophy is a way of life, and there's a lot of different schools of it, have some useful considerations for us on these matters. Ancient philosophers, okay, they weren't living in the kind of situation that we are. They tended to be kind of, they're part of elites. They thought that people who worked with their hands were really living a crappy life. Aristotle looks down on them, for example. And, they had some pretty clear ideas about what kind of life was a life that was fully human, that we might reject in part. But they did think that leisure was important, not just for philosophy, but for any sort of good life in general. And, Aristotle provides us with a framework for thinking about the kind of life that we want to live. So what we call a teleology, or an orientation towards goals. And a lot of his ideas translate very well to today. You've got lives that are devoted to making money, like the guy that we started out talking about at the beginning. And Aristotle calls that a life of compulsion, But he thinks that some people can start viewing that as like the goal in itself, just accumulate as much money or wealth or whatever it's going to be as you can. Then, some people are devoted to just enjoying as many pleasures as they can. These are the people who say, oh, if I won the lottery, I'd never work another day in my life. I would just go on cruises and enjoy myself. And, you notice that it doesn't really work out that way for a lot of lottery winners. Their life tends to be kind of shallow and empty when they actually get everything that they want. And then he also talks about the life pursuing honor or, positions, prestige, that kind of thing. And he says that that's also, it's good, but it's kind of hollow. And then he proposes two lives as the good life. One is the life of contemplation, or theoria, the word we get theory from. And, it's funny because a lot of people think that they imagine to themselves that the life of the academic is like that. Most academics these days are not living a life of contemplation and theoria. They're having to do all sorts of administrative tasks and worrying about whether they're going to get fired in a couple of years or stuff like that. But the other life that he talks about, that I myself am actually much more attracted to, is the life that is devoted to virtuous activity. And this doesn't have to be, virtuous activity with the exact list that Aristotle has, or, the four cardinal virtues that the Stoics and the Platonists recognized. I mean, I think that you can have a career where you're making some sort of contribution to people's lives, and that's a life of virtuous activity, or the life of taking care of other people is the life of virtuous activity, a meaningful life where you're actually doing some good things. But even those lives, you need some downtime, some socializing, some relaxation, some, as he calls them, amusements or play, paideia, the word for the kind of play that kids do, right? And Aristotle thinks that this is something valuable. It's not like the whole goal of life, but we need it. And if we deprive ourselves of it, we're cutting ourselves off from the good life, you could say. I mean, what do you make of that idea?
So,
do we need to be, the relaxation that comes with play? Just screwing around.
I think part of that, especially from a virtue ethic point of view, is that a lot of time our play is with others, and so there is a duty that one has, especially to their friends, if you want to have friends, or things that you do with them in order to foster and nurture those relationships. And if you're not doing those things, then you're not being a really good friend. And so it requires you to have, some of these, frivolous, relaxing times with these people in order to be good at being a friend with them.
Yeah, that makes sense. sometimes I use as an example, how can you tell who your friends are? Well, they're the ones who, if they have a truck, will help you move, right? But it can't all be helping you move. Sometimes it has to be the pizza party after that and having the 6-pack of beers and sitting around and chewing the fat,
Right.
Or, and it could include things that otherwise might be, distractions, like sitting and watching a show together. If all you're doing is watching show after show after show, maybe that's not good, but doing it with another person and laughing at the same stuff and
discussing it afterwards.
Exactly.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Or stopping the discussion midpoint, and then you never actually get back to the thing that you were watching in the first place. Because
not every friend's going to be cool with that.
I'm just kind of like, there's been a number of times in my life where it is the conversation has been such a better use of our times, and we both realized it at the moment that the media, whatever we were watching, takes a major backseat. That this interaction is the much more valuable thing.
That's true. And it needs to be something that isn't like rigidly scheduled, right? Or there's not a checklist for how to have a good interaction or something like that.
I didn't hit all the box. I didn't have a good time.
Yeah.
Oh no.
The Stoics, I think, also have some useful things to contribute. And the Stoics are interesting because, as opposed to like the Platonists or the Aristotelians, where you've got you're essentially in the rich class and you don't have to work and you study philosophy. Quite a few of the Stoic philosophers had day jobs. Cleanthes was a water carrier. Epictetus runs a school but starts himself out as a slave, and eventually is teaching people and having conversations. Marcus Aurelius, of course, is stuck with in some respects, the best and the worst job of all, emperor of the entire Roman Empire, which, man, I would not want that job.
Heavy the head, wears the crown.
Yeah. But, I think some of the things that they have to contribute is reminding us that we don't want to be too wrapped up with what they called indifference or externals. And wealth is one of those, our social position. We don't want to be too anxious about that stuff so that when we actually have free time, we're constantly worried or obsessed or comparing ourselves to other people. That's not particularly helpful. Epictetus, interestingly, actually has a whole chapter in his discourses about people who make relaxation or peace or free time their primary goal. And they sort of structure their life around that. And he says that can even turn into a trap. Because you get too attached to it. You need to learn how to roll with what you're dealt and find the spots where you can take a breather and relax and then get back to what it is that you need to do. One other thing I would mention too, Seneca has this book called On Shortness of Life, and it's a good reminder, right? Because we could die tomorrow. But how can we have a good life? He's going to frame it in terms of philosophy. He says those only the people who give their life to philosophy are at leisure, only they truly live. It's not just their own lifetime. They watch over carefully. They take on every age to their own. All the years that have gone before are added to their own. Now, when you say it that way, it doesn't have to be philosophy. It could be history. It could be thinking about whatever discipline you're involved with. So he uses the example of we can dispute with Socrates, entertain doubt with Carneades, who was a skeptic, be at peace with Epicurus, overcome human nature with the Stoics, go beyond it with the Cynics. And we can do this reading Seneca. We can also do this reading great literature. I'm going to be teaching, for example, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein next semester. I'm looking forward to getting to read it again and share it with undergraduates who probably had to read it in high school as an assigned text, and we're going to reread it and, actually pay attention to what's going on in it. And I know the last time that I read Frankenstein, I really enjoyed it. you know? So, you know, I think the Stoics would be cool with us finding the things that we derive real enjoyment, real refreshment from, and incorporating that, not in a like self-indulgent way, but in a way that recognizes that we human beings do need downtime. You know, and maybe for not everybody needs to do philosophy. Could be other things instead.
Yeah, I like this idea of like, you know, the literature, you know, there's a oft-quoted, like, what a man lives but one life, but a man who reads lives 1,000, that we get this greater perspective of the world. And once again, this kind of comes back to the idea that I put forward earlier about what do we actually want in our lives. And if we are so, you know, cloistered that we don't know any of the other options that are potentially available to us, and we can never make a really fully well-informed decision about what we want to pursue in our own lives. I really do like in here with the Stoics, so like it's very practical, and specifically that it's not something that you have to have money and time to be, you know, in your maybe the Epicurean walled garden, that you this is something that you do as part of life.
You know, and people can become too attached to being like the best Stoic they can possibly be, or the best Aristotelian, or pick whatever else you want, right? And not recognize that, hey, these things take a lot of time. And even Epictetus says, hey, I'm never going to be Socrates, but at least I can be a decent Epictetus. You know, he was placing Socrates above him in the ordering of, like, I guess, great philosophers. And I don't even need to be an Epictetus. It's enough for me to be a decent instructor and writer, and, you know, do a radio show like this, and that sort of thing, right?
Right. Yeah, like the, you know, comparison is the thief of happiness, as an idea here that, you know, comparing yourselves to others is going to make you unhappy, but comparing yourself to the person you were yesterday can just be a little bit better than that. And maybe you don't even have to be better than that. Just tread water, because sometimes you just need to relax and keep that afloat.
Yeah, I think that's a really important recognition. I mean, we have this phrase, don't let the best be the enemy of the good, right? And what's important in there is recognizing that even if we are just like staying where we are, and as you say, treading water, that's still a good. It's still an achievement, you know? You may not be getting to, I don't know, whatever crystal palace you're trying to establish, you know, down the line, to use just one of the many metaphors that we could have, but it's still an accomplishment. It's still something, you know. There is one other person I wanted to bring up, Rainer Maria Rilke, this German language poet, also a novelist, letter writer. He wrote this work that I like a lot called Letters to a Young Poet. Which often gets used. Like, there's also Letters to a Young Chef by a culinary guy. There's Letters to a Young Philosopher out there. But Rilke was a poet, and he had this guy who wrote him, and he like sent Rilke some poems, and he's like, hey, can you check my poems out and tell me whether they're any good? And Rilke says, ooh, they're not very good, but let me tell you, kid. And he gives him a whole bunch of advice. And one of the terms that he brings up over and over and over again, we translate it as solitude. In German, it's Einsamkeit, which literally means being on your own. And being on your own can sometimes be lonely, but it's also, Rilke thinks, really important. And we need to be able to cultivate this, like, not being involved in things, just sort of like paying attention to what's there. It could be what's there in our memories of our childhood. It could be like paying attention to the natural world that we're involved in. It could be paying attention to, how your body feels after you do a workout. It could be anything you want. And it can also involve other people. And interestingly, for Rilke, solitude is something that you can cultivate even in crowds. So you can be in the coffee house with everybody else around you doing stuff, and you're just cultivating your solitude. And he thinks that this is important for us, this like not detaching from the world, but like opening ourselves up to a deeper dimension of it. And it actually is important for even romantic relationships. He's got this wonderful phrase that I love. He says, "For one human being to love another, that is perhaps the most difficult of all of our tasks." And he's probably right about that. "The ultimate last test and proof, the work for which all other work is but preparation. I hold this to be the highest task for a bond between two people, two solitudes, each of which protects the other." So, you take the person who's been able to develop and can be on their own, and you put them together with another person like that, not just like giving into convention, not just like trying to, have a hookup and get it on or something like that, but actually and this could be friendship, this could be love, this could be all sorts of things, but two solitudes that recognize and protect each other because they've cultivated that within themselves. I think is that the same thing as downtime? No, but I think it's adjacent to it. What do you make of that? Does that resonate with you, or?
A bit. I don't know if I've fully grokked this to be. I don't know. There's definitely something along the lines of being able to be with a person without directly interacting, to be just in the same space and be comfortable therein.
Yeah. Not having to chatter, right?
Yeah, to just like, oh, well, you're going to read a book and I'm going to read a book and we're going to be in close proximity and we might have some tea, but there's no need for us to directly interact. But just the presence of another person that you have this strong relationship with.
Do you think that could extend to our relationships with animals, like our pets, as well?
Depends on how needy your pet is. Your cat or dog is like, give me pets, give me pets, give me pets.
That's true, yeah. There are some pets where maybe they would constantly be bugging you for attention, right?
But yeah, I think in general, there lots of times it's just nice to have the cat sitting and purring on your lap, and you're reading a book or something, or the dog is just curled up next to you, and it's just a presence.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, and maybe we provide that to other people too if we're not like too needy in how we're using our leisure time, how we're using our downtime, right?
Right.
Well, so, go ahead.
We have a practice here. So saying no, can you go deeper into that, Greg?
I think this is a very quick one. Say no to something you would ordinarily say yes to, and then use that time and use it to do nothing.
Nothing?
Try to do nothing with it.
What is this nothing?
Yeah, you don't have to just sit there, but just don't try to make it productive. Just try out and see what happens with that. But we're getting really close to the end of the time. So
yeah.
Do you want to lead us out with a final thought?
Yeah, so we have our final words from Bertrand Russell. A great deal of harm is being done in the world by belief in the virtuousness of work. The road to happiness and prosperity lies in an organized diminution of work.